So, our next speaker, we're on that global cyber threat intelligence trend. Jason is an international experienced intelligence and security leader who possesses 15 years of innovating intersection of cybersecurity and operational technology. His career has published in many conferences across the globe. Jason is currently at CrowdStrike, where he leads a global threat cyber professionals to apply threat intelligence, cybersecurity solutions to combat the world's most prolific threats. Jason also, little do you guys know, is a musician. And some of the music that you heard in the beginning of the conference, he's a music producer and was produced by Jason. So without further ado, sophisticated web attacks, understanding the cohesive Ecrime of the adversary universe is going to be covered by Jason. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, everyone. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. This is actually my second time in Saudi Arabia. The first time I came was in the 2019 timeframe. And then, of course, COVID happened, and that threw all sorts of issues out there. But certainly good to be back, and I'm glad to be presenting at this conference with you all. So as Samir said, I'm going to be talking about Ecrime, and I'm going to be talking about the latest developments of what we've seen from a CrowdStrike perspective. So let's go ahead and begin. Samir already did a fantastic introduction, so no need to do that one again. And here is what I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to go over a variety of subjects. And what I want to get across overall during this presentation is the sophistication of how we've seen criminal adversaries evolve. And I think it's important for all of us as leaders to be aware of that sophistication. If I were to express one of the most important things that I can while I'm here, your awareness as leaders, your awareness of the threat, your ability to understand the threat prior to having to experience it is what will make or break the difference during a breach. So let's go ahead and begin. Let's first talk a little bit about adversary sophistication. And what we're showing here is a depiction of what I call the accelerated threat landscape. Notice how over time, things become more and more complex. The attacks are not only faster, but they're also more damaging. We've evolved from having simple viruses to Trojans, and then eventually we have ransomware. And now these days we're looking at sophisticated supply chain threats, access brokers, hybrid threats, threats as a service. And what I'm trying to articulate on this slide is that it is becoming harder and harder to do your job. Not only is it more difficult to do your job, but you are facing an adversary that is faster, more sophisticated, and more well-paid and more well-trained than we have ever faced in the past, which gets back to my point. We need to understand these adversaries. And if you take one thing away from this speech today, just one thing alone, I want you to take away this number. What you are looking at is the average breakout time of how long it takes an adversary once they gain access to move laterally. So let me say this very clearly. You have 1 hour and 38 minutes. Within 1 hour and 38 minutes, the average criminal adversary, not only after they gain access to your network, within 1 hour and 38 minutes, they will be able to move laterally. Once they move laterally, your ability to stop them is very much so hampered. Your ability to stop them once they move laterally is a lot lower. The probability is a lot lower because now they'll have elevated access, domain credentials, and access to your sensitive file shares. So the 1 hour and 38 minutes number, that was in 2021. Look at the number in 2018, 9 hours and 42 minutes. So I started CrowdStrike in 2018, and since I've started CrowdStrike, the adversary is 9 times faster than they were 4 years ago. Within 4 years, they have become 9 times faster. And what this does, in my opinion, is it makes us ask ourselves a very honest question. Right now, if a criminal adversary were to get into your network, would you stop them within 1 hour and 38 minutes? And again, I think as leaders, this is one of those very difficult questions we have to ask ourselves. Do you actually have the ability to do it within 1 hour and 38 minutes? And if not, how are we going to change that? What are the things that we're going to put into place in order to make that better? The average remediation time in 2021 was 162 hours. So let's compare that. It takes criminals 1 hour and 38 minutes. On average, it takes us 162 hours. And remember what Lieutenant General Stewart said. He said that the average criminal breach will cost you $4 million. So let's put that all together. On average, it takes criminals 1 hour and 38 minutes to break into your network. And if they succeed, it will cost on average $4 million. So again, this is something as leaders that we have to think about. Not only is the adversary more sophisticated in terms of speed, but they're also more sophisticated in terms of complexity. Look at the bottom of the slide where I'm showing malware versus malware-free attacks. 62% of attacks detected by CrowdStrike were malware-free. That means they're not going to use executables, so they're using things like command line, PowerShell, RDP brute forcing, PSExec. Sometimes they're using tools that are native on your network. So again, I'm going to ask you a very hard question. If the adversary broke into your network, and if they didn't use any malware at all, if they used zero malware, would you detect them? And again, I think as leaders, that's one of the most important things that we can do, is be honest with ourselves. Do we have the ability to stop them at this speed? And do we also have the ability to stop them with the advanced sophistication using malware-free attacks? And again, compare that to 2018. So I like to use 2018 statistics because I started in 2018. And as you can see, in 2018, the number was flipped on its head. 60% of the attacks were malware and 40% malware-free. So again, the overall message of this slide is that the adversary is not only getting faster, but the sophistication of their attacks is also becoming more severe. Here's another interesting statistic. What you are looking at is CrowdStrike's distinct and sophisticated intrusion telemetry. As you can see, the nation state is the red, unassigned is the blue, which means we don't know one way or the other, and the green is criminal. Notice which direction it's going in terms of the amount of activity that we're seeing. Here's another interesting statistic for you. In a 2-year time span between Q1 2019 to Q1 2021, we saw a 300% increase. In a 1-year time span, from Q1 2021 to Q2 2022, we saw a 300% increase. So again, we're all looking at the same thing. 3 years, or 2 years, 300% increase. 1 year, 300% increase. So again, we're dealing with this problem. We're dealing with an adversary that is faster, more sophisticated, and now, these days, we're seeing 700% more attacks than we did in Q1 2019. But then that brings us a problem, right? Do any of us have 700% more budget than we did in 2019? Do any of us have 700% more people than we did in 2019? Probably not, right? So the adversary is moving faster, there's more of them, they're more sophisticated, and yet we're not evolving at the same pace. So again, today I'm presenting this problem. I'm presenting a very difficult problem that not only are we dealing with at CrowdStrike, but all of us, we are all dealing with this together. There is not a single one of us that is not threatened by cybercrime. So I'm going to introduce you to this idea that I've been pioneering called the adversary operations lifecycle. And here is my premise to you. I challenge you to see adversarial behavior not as just one thing, but rather a series of things. Every single actor that has ever attacked you is seeking to do 3 things, whether they are a nation state, whether they are a criminal, whether they are a hacktivist. It could be Iran, China, Russia, criminals, it doesn't matter. They are all seeking to do 3 and only 3 things to you. They want to get into your network, they want to engage in post-exploitation and move laterally and elevate their privileges, and then they want to hit you with something. And so let's think about the implications of that, because what does that mean? We all want to stop ransomware, right? I think everyone in this room wants to stop ransomware. I don't want any of you to be hit with ransomware. I don't want my customers to be hit with ransomware. I don't think anybody wants this. So here's what that means. To stop ransomware, you actually have to stop them from moving laterally and doing post-exploitation. To stop them from moving laterally and doing post-exploitation, you have to stop them from gaining initial access. So again, remember what Lieutenant General Stewart said. He was talking about things like identity protection, vulnerability management. It is a full spectrum problem. One of the most important things that you can do to stop this problem is to stop the access, focus on things like identity, focus on things like visibility, your capacity to see them once they're actually in the network. So let's go ahead and look at these various areas and kind of dive into how we see the adversary operating. Identity is about 80% of the problem. According to Forrester, according to CrowdStrike, according to Verizon, 80% of breaches will have an identity-related nexus to them. So what does that mean? That means leaked credentials. It could be credential brute forcing. It could be access brokers on the dark web selling your credentials. If 80% of the problem has an identity-related nexus to this, then I would imagine that we should be thinking about, well, how do I solve 80% of the problem? And this is one answer to what I was showing you earlier. One way that we combat a higher volume of threats, one way that we combat a more complex threat is by focusing on the things that have the biggest impact. One of the most impactful things that you could possibly do is engage in identity and access management, and here's why identity and access management is so important. Think about what happened at COVID-19. What was everybody doing in February of 2020? My guess is we were all going into the office, right? Everyone's going into the office, going to work, having coffee, working with colleagues. And what were we all doing in March 2020? All of us worked from home. So what does that mean? How did we have to get back into the network? Well, we had to use VPNs. We had to use RDP. We had to log into infrastructure as a service, applications as a service. And what this created is a situation where the identity became the new perimeter. The new firewall is your identity. The identity of each and every single individual at your company is the primary vehicle through which any type of adversary, to include both criminal and nation state, will get into your network. And one of the more prevalent threats that we're seeing that also relates to identity is the criminal discipline of access brokers. An access broker is exactly as it sounds. It is an individual that specializes in getting into your network, gaining access, and the way that they do this is by infecting you with a botnet. With that infected malware that comes as a result of the botnet, they are collecting two things. They are collecting your credentials, and then they're collecting vulnerability information. And their objective in collecting these credentials and vulnerability information is to sell that on the dark web. They want to monetize it as part of a marketplace, which brings a larger problem. You heard me say earlier that the criminals are faster and that they are more sophisticated. One of the reasons that the criminals are faster and more sophisticated than they ever have been in the past is because now they're all specializing. They're working as a team. And you know what's funny about that? The same way that we work as a team, they work as a team. So for example, on your team, you have vulnerability management, incident response, threat intelligence, SOC, threat hunters. You have a CISO and a leader, and you all work on teams, right? I work on a team too. The criminals also work on a team. And what working on teams does is it allows them to specialize, and their ability to specialize has allowed them to move faster, and it has allowed them higher degrees of sophistication. One of the most significant areas of specialization is exactly what I'm showing you on this screen, which is the access brokers. Let's do a comparison of what we're seeing across the world, because something I want to express is that this is a global problem. Obviously, you can see the huge increase in North America and Europe, but let's go ahead and look at the Middle East as well. The problem has doubled. So again, this is another one of those trends where every single area across the board, all across every single region, we are seeing double the threat, double the issue when it comes to access brokers. So this is one of those things that, again, that we should be asking ourselves. How are we going to stop access brokers? How are we going to monitor for them? How will we use dark web monitoring capabilities and threat intelligence in order to find evidence of the access brokers prior to them selling our data? And it's not just by region that the problem is getting worse. This is by sector. So what we're doing here is comparing the first half of 2021 to the first half of 2022. 2021 is in the blue, 2021 is in the red. Again, double the threat across every single critical industry. Here's the challenge that's happening here. You're noticing that every single chart that I'm showing you, increasing, every single chart that I'm showing you, whether it's the breach time, whether it's the sophistication, the access broker, the volume of threat, all across the board, we are dealing with an adversary that is outpacing us in terms of sophistication, speed, capability. So again, it comes back to, well, how do we do those major big ticket items that are going to stop them? And now let's talk a little bit about post-exploitation. So remember, the first phase is they're going to get into your network. The second phase is they're going to do post-exploitation and move laterally and elevate their privileges. I think this is an interesting slide because what this slide talks about is some of the more prevalent post-exploitation tactics that we see them using. So again, many of the adversaries that get into your network, whether they're criminals or nation states, they're not going to use malware. The reason they're not going to use malware is because you're looking for malware. If your systems detect executables, if you have hash-based defenses, if the only way that you protect yourself is by using legacy AV that is looking for malicious hashes and malicious malware, that is the reason that the adversary chooses to not use malware. They choose to not use malware because it is harder for us to detect non-malware-based attacks. So again, here's a listing of some of the more recent trends. I think this slide is interesting as well, because what this slide is about is how the adversary will use our tools to do the jobs that they're trying to do. So you're looking and you're seeing things like TeamViewer, AnyDesk. You're seeing tools that all of us use. These are legitimate tools that any of us use to do business, remote access tools that allow us to collaborate with each other. And what I think is interesting is that the adversary adapts the way that we adapt. When I speak to customers, I will often tell them that the adversary is like water. And think about how water behaves. What does water do when it hits a wall? It just moves. It finds the next opening. Water is very flexible, and the adversary behaves like water. And so if the adversary behaves like water, then I would argue that we need to learn to think the way that they do. We need to learn to think with the same level of flexibility. What would you do in their situation? Because the interesting thing about this is the reason that they're choosing to use these tools is because of how much we rely on these tools now in order to engage in collaboration. So again, let's think through that mantra. The adversary is like water. They adapt to everything we do. We use more identity. They do identity-based attacks. We navigate to the cloud. They do cloud-based attacks. We use more remote collaboration capabilities. They do more attacks using remote collaboration capabilities. The adversary is a perfect mirror to you. Everything that you do, that is what they do. Every move you make, they make a counter move that is perfectly aligned to the move that you just made. And let's think lastly about the actions that they're going after. So again, there's initial access, post-exploitation, and then target execution. What you're looking at is a comparison of ransomware attacks between 2020 and 2021. By now, you're probably not surprised at what I'm showing you anymore. It's kind of like every chart looks the same. Every year, double the issue, double the issue. And what we've noticed in particular is that there are certain industries that are more likely to be threatened than other industries. So all the time, we always see industrials and engineering, manufacturing, technology, public sector, finance and healthcare. Those are always the top ones. The adversary is very intentional. A lot of people believe that criminals are only opportunistic, that criminals always go after the lowest hanging fruit. And although this is true in many cases, their targeting is actually very intentional. So think about a manufacturer. Every second that a manufacturer is not manufacturing, they're losing money. Every second that a technology provider is not providing technology for its customers, losing money. Every second that a public sector entity that is serving its citizens is not available for its citizens, then its citizens are at risk. Over and over again, the logic applies. Same with the financial sector. What happens if you can't access your bank? That bank starts suffering brand damage. And so the adversary is very intentional in their targeting. They're going after specific industries. And if your industry is on this top list up here, then you are at a higher risk than other industries relative to the criminal threat that we're all facing. One of the most prevalent adversaries that we've seen lately is referred to by CrowdStrike as Bitwise Spider. You might better know Bitwise Spider as Lockbit 2.0. And what Lockbit has specialized in is the use of ransomware as a service. Ransomware as a service is also exactly as it sounds. It is a business model. And the purpose of ransomware as a service is to allow the increased proliferation of ransomware attacks. So imagine that if you were a ransomware actor, let's imagine that you are a very successful, very intelligent ransomware actor. What would be your biggest problem? If you were a ransomware actor, your biggest problem would be that you don't have enough time in the day to carry out ransomware attacks. You're making so much money executing all these attacks, but you just don't have enough time. So what do? Well, you can't invite people to kind of join your criminal gang, right? I can't invite people into my house if I'm a criminal. I don't know who they are. Maybe they're the police, maybe they're the military. And so the answer to that within the criminal society is the creation of ransomware as a service. Now what these ransomware operators will do is instead of just one ransomware operator, that one ransomware operator will partner with 50 to 100 affiliates, and they'll give that ransomware to those affiliates and allow them to execute the attacks. If the affiliate succeeds in the attack, the affiliate keeps 80% of the money and the ransomware operator keeps 20% of the money. So one of the reasons that you are seeing a higher volume of attacks is not only the access brokers, not only the speed, but also just literally, there are literally more ransomware operators out there. So we've talked about a lot of issues, talked about a lot of threats, and I think there's a lot of solutions that need to be discussed. I'm not going to go into those solutions today. I'm not going to go into all the specific things that you should be doing. I think Lieutenant General Stewart did a great job of that, and I think there's a lot of vendors here, to include, of course, CrowdStrike, that can help with this. But at the end of the day, what I challenge you to do is think about proactive disciplines. We need to learn to think like the adversary. Remember what I said, the adversary is like water. They do exactly what we do. They adapt. They adapt in the same ways that we move. So I would challenge that we, as cybersecurity leaders and professionals, need to adapt proactive disciplines, things like threat hunting. We need to look for the adversary 24/7. Why 24/7? Well, the adversary likes to attack you when you're not working. They know when your weekends are, they know when your holidays are, and they intentionally attack you during those times. A great example of that is the Kaseya ransomware attack. The Kaseya ransomware attack happened on the July 4th weekend of 2021, so the US Independence Day, and the adversary intentionally chose that time to do the attack. So for that reason, we need to do things like 24/7 threat hunting. Identity protection is a huge one. Remember what I said earlier, the identity is the new perimeter. Each and every one of you and all of your employees are the new perimeter of your organization. So we need to protect the identity of our employees through the use of multi-factor authentication, as well as by limiting employee authorities within the environment. We need to engage in adversary profiling. We need to understand the adversary before they attack us. There are only two ways to learn about the adversary. There's exactly two. The first way to learn about the adversary is for them to hit you, which that's not a great way to learn. Learning only by getting hit, eventually that's when problems occur. The other way that we can learn about the adversary is to study them, to study the adversary through threat intelligence so that we can preempt and predict their behaviors should those behaviors ever come up. We need to be thinking about how we're protecting cloud workloads. In general, all throughout society, society is moving to the cloud. What it ultimately boils down to is cloud is more efficient, it scales better, and frankly, and if done correctly, it's easier to protect. And remember what I said, the adversary is like water. So if we're focusing more on the cloud, then they will also focus more on the cloud. And therefore, we need to focus on how are we protecting these cloud workloads, how are we managing vulnerabilities, and how are we engaging in protections that are specific to cloud environments. And lastly, there's intelligence monitoring. Remember what I said about the access brokers. Access brokers are intentionally going after your data, and they are intentionally monetizing that data on the dark web, as well as other criminal locations. So how will we use intelligence monitoring and other advanced capabilities in order to become aware of those adversaries before they engage in attacks against our environment? One of my favorite slides is this one. And the reason I like this slide is because it demonstrates a relationship. There are only two things that matter in cybersecurity. There's us, all of us, and the adversary. That is it. There's only two things. And our job as cybersecurity professionals is to understand the adversary. Your ability to understand the adversary is what will allow you to make the right decision. Your ability to make the right decision is what will make or break the difference with your organization in terms of stopping a breach or being breached and suffering the damage of that breach. So again, I challenge you to think of that phrase up top. Your ability to defeat advanced cyber threats rests almost entirely on your understanding of the problem. If we know the problem, we'll make the right decision. So thank you everyone for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference today.
Q&A.
Yeah, are there any questions from the audience? Anything that I could help answer?
Jason, there's one
Yes.
question right there. I see somebody's hand. Was that you raising your hand or you? Okay, let's get him the mic.
First of all, thank you, sir. My name is Imran. I'm working in Saudi Telecom Company. My question is, when we are talking about the vulnerability, there is a domain, a hardware level vulnerability. If something is burned inside the ROM BIOS, for example, my storage zero sector is having some vulnerability. So no any penetration testing or vulnerability or any antivirus can detect that. So how we can deal those kind of very critical and dangerous vulnerabilities?
It's a good question. So for me, vulnerability management is a three-step process. The first step is your awareness of the vulnerability itself. Many organizations actually do not possess awareness of the vulnerability, which is why the adversary is able to use that vulnerability in order to engage in the attacks. Once you have awareness of the vulnerability, then it's about prioritization of the vulnerability. Prioritization is critical within the cybersecurity industry. Not all problems are equal. If all problems are important, then none of your problems are important. So particularly in the vulnerability management discipline, using threat intelligence to take those vulnerabilities and see which adversaries are likely to exploit them is a good way to prioritize. And then lastly, there's the remediation of vulnerabilities. So having capabilities that allow you to know not only where the vulnerability is at, but then the capacity to rapidly remediate them. I think most of what I said is probably very familiar with the audience, but probably the biggest piece is the prioritization piece. There will never be an environment that is not in some way, shape, or form vulnerable. All of us, I would imagine, protect very large and very complex environments. Those large and complex environments are going to have vulnerabilities. So the ability to prioritize which ones matter most is a key element of that, because by prioritization, then we can focus on the problems that are the most severe. Any other questions?
Thank you, Jason. This is Mohammed from the Ministry of Tourism. My question is, what do you think is the future of products or shifted market when it comes to detection? Like historically speaking, at the early stage of cyber trends or market, we've seen antiviruses, and then we've seen EDRs, and then we've seen NDRs. I want just your opinion. What do you think is the shift or the next trend in terms of detection solutions?
It's a great question. The future, and so this is my opinion, of course. The future of cybersecurity products is a product that can do everything in a single solution. Here's why. One of the biggest problems faced by the cybersecurity industry right now is that each of us is managing 20, 50 different solutions. These 20, 50 different solutions are not designed to talk to each other. They're not designed to work together. They all look different. They all require unique expertise, and they all require unique technical capabilities. Not only are these 20, 50 solutions not designed to work together, but these 50 different solutions are also very expensive. And it's like all the time, more and more solutions. Everyone's trying to sell you something. There's 45 vendors out there, to include CrowdStrike. All of us are trying to sell you something, right? And so think of it like this. That becomes problematic at a certain point. Trying to manage 50 different things is problematic, especially when we go back to what I said. You have 1 hour and 38 minutes. Are we going to make 50 different solutions stop the adversary in 1 hour and 38 minutes? I don't know. And so for that reason, I believe that the future is a single platform that does everything. Not only does the single platform do everything, but the solutions within the platform talk to each other. The intelligence part of the platform tells the endpoint security part of the platform what to stop. The dark web monitoring part of the platform tells the identity part of the platform how to issue multi-factor authentication. The vulnerability part of the platform automatically links up with the EDR part of the platform and is fixing the problems even before you're aware of the problem. So artificial intelligence is also a big part of this. Artificial intelligence is critical, right? Because again, 1 hour and 38 minutes, that number is not going to go up. The number is only going to go down. It's going to get lower and lower. Here's a number that I didn't share during the presentation, and this is back in 2018. In 2018, the breakout time of Russia was 17 minutes and 42 seconds. On average, it took Russian nation-state actors 17 minutes and 42 seconds to engage in breakout, and that was in 2018. So I have no idea what they're doing now, but the point is that if we're going to stop this breakout time at that speed, then we must all kind of navigate to this one solution mentality. Good question. And yes, sir.
What are your thoughts on having a shared threat intelligence or SOC operation between all nation states or entities around the world to cover for the gap that we currently have in skills or personnel in cybersecurity?
Yeah, so how do we account for the gaps in cybersecurity? It's a tough one, right? Because I think kind of going back to, and both Lieutenant General Stewart said this as well as I said this, the problem is growing faster than our rate to stop this. So I think there's a lot to this, right? I think the first part is thinking more about artificial intelligence. How do we make it to where we can leverage our machines more intelligently, to where we don't need as many people? Because I think this problem is everywhere. Every single country on Earth, every single modern country on Earth is facing a shortage within the cybersecurity profession discipline. And the reason I think they're facing the shortage isn't because there's necessarily a shortage of people. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of smart people all throughout the world, but I think the problem is growing faster than we can educate our population to defend against it. And so the answer to this question, in my opinion, is almost the same as my answer to the last question. It's having solutions that allow us to scale faster. Instead of needing 50 people in your SOC, it's having solutions to where you only need 25 people in your SOC, 20 people for your SOC. And a lot of people look at that and they think, oh, job security, but the jobs will always be there. The challenge about the jobs, though, is that we cannot make enough jobs to keep up with the rate of the threat. I think the other method is a concentrated training program. So again, this is something else that Lieutenant General Stewart alluded to, but we need to all be focused on cybersecurity training. I think he brought up an interesting point in that maybe a 4-year degree is not always the answer. Maybe it's an apprentice, journeyman, master approach. But in either case, whether it's training more people or using more artificial intelligence to require less people, honestly, it's kind of probably both, but I think we need a lot of different solutions in order to actually solve the problem.